Special thanks to our promotional partners at the American Philatelic Society.
The APS is the largest stamp collecting organization in the world, supporting collectors of any level worldwide.
For more information about membership and APS services, visit stamps.org.
I'm Charles Epting from H.R. Harmer in New York City.
And I'm Michael Cortese of Noble Spirit in Pittsfield, New Hampshire.
And this is
Tobi Huylmans of Heinrich Köhler Auctions in Germany.
And we are Conversations with Philatelists. People will hopefully remember Tobi from an episode we did several months ago where Tobi talked about his expertising. And it was one of my favorite episodes we've done. And now with the world slowly reopening, I'm very happy to have Tobi back in the New York office. He flew in on the first day that Europeans, I don't know why Michael's laughing. He flew in on the first day that Europeans were allowed to return to America.
First flight
from Germany to the U.S.
Really? That's incredible.
Did not post a first flight cover, though, on his page.
No, I'm sure that's philatelic.
Missed opportunity.
Don't get ahead of it. So Tobi's been here working in our office, helping us get ready for our December auction. And Michael, you and I were trying to figure out what this week's episode should be about. And then we just grabbed Tobi, and he was kind enough to join us.
Right? You forced me, but yes, yeah. I'm happy to be on.
But Michael, there's something we've been talking about this week. We've been bouncing back and forth, and I think we just want to cover it. I'm not sure how much we can contribute originally to these two discussions that have been going on, but on Richard Fergiola's message board, which is one of the centers for philatelic discourse and research and debate on the internet, there have been two discussions going on for the last week or so, which I think we should cover very briefly. The more recent and maybe simpler is the issue of what is a commemorative postage stamp. The other discussion, which may require a bit more parsing, is this discussion about philatelically inspired mail or philatelic mail versus whatever the alternative is. And there's sort of a semantic discussion going on as well as a philosophical discussion.
Right.
So I think we should tackle the commemoratives first.
So both of these issues kind of arose from talking about exhibiting and judging different exhibits.
Exactly. And you know, they may seem, like I use the word semantic, they may seem trivial, they may seem superficial, but the importance of an exhibit and the credence with which a judge judges an exhibit depends on these definitions. And I think that's why these conversations are quite important to have. So to kick off the commemorative discussion, I think it is a commonly held conception that the Colombians are the first U.S. commemorative postage stamps. Tobi, what are the first German commemorative stamps? I don't know off the top. I know in Great Britain, it was the 1924 Wembley exhibition.
Okay.
Commemorative stamp in Germany.
I guess you could consider it what must have been 1900, like these large format 1 to 5 mark stamps.
Those were commemorating
the anniversary of, I don't know, something.
But there was something commemorative.
Yeah.
But the traditional definition of a commemorative stamp, and on the Fergiola board, they've quoted Lynn's handbook directly on this.
Right.
But a commemorative stamp typically honors an event, a person, or a place, and is issued in somewhat limited quantities, whereas a definitive stamp does not have a particular reason for its release and is generally not limited. So in the U.S., with adhesive postage stamps, the obvious answer is the Colombian exhibition issue of 1893, 1 cent through $5. These were issued for the Colombian World's Fair, which in turn was supposed to honor the 400th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of America, and they missed the mark by 1 year. So it was the 401st anniversary in 1893. But these stamps were issued for that exhibition, for that anniversary. Going back a little bit further, in 1876, we had a stamped envelope, or two stamped envelopes, red and green, for the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. This was 1876, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the country. There was likewise a World's Fair in Philadelphia, and these special envelopes were printed, very nice, ornate shield design, to honor that World's Fair. There were also reprints made of U.S. postage stamp, every U.S. stamp up until that point, that were done for the exhibition. There's been debate, are those commemoratives? Because they were made for the exhibition, but the designs themselves, the subject matter, is not commemorating anything.
Right.
And then the discussion on the Fredrola board has really been hinging around the 1866 15-cent black Lincoln stamp, which was issued around the 1-year anniversary of Lincoln's death. We've got a Scott catalog here. We're gonna get a picture of it so that nobody knows what we're talking about. That one right there.
Yeah, you showed me the cover. Yeah.
Do you want to hold it up?
Oh, we can.
I think people know what you're talking about.
I think people should.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this stamp was, Lincoln was shot April 14th, 1865. He died early in the morning of April 15th, 1865. This stamp came out, what is the earliest known usage as listed by Scott? Doesn't say, that's helpful. But it's around April of 1866. Mm-hmm. So this was, up until this point, the only people who had been on stamps there were 3 people who had been on stamps up until this point. 4 people who had been on stamps up until this point. Mm-hmm. Toby, you want to guess?
Washington.
Franklin.
Jefferson. And Jackson.
Yeah. Were the only 4 people who had appeared on U.S. postage stamps. All of them were very far removed from their administrations. Mm-hmm. Washington and Franklin in 1847, Jefferson a couple years later, Jackson was about 20 years after his presidency. So to have this quick turnaround of 1 year, almost to the day, to get Lincoln on a stamp, is viewed by some people as a commemoration.
Right. Okay.
Because it was not normal to put a president on a stamp so soon after his death. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's an argument to be made for the 1866 15-cent Lincoln as the first commemorative stamp. There's also some discussion about some of the 1869s. Were these commemorating anything in particular? The 24-cent in specifically.
Right.
So there's this weird, ambiguous, and then there's also the debate. Is there a strict definition, or is this something we are imposing 150 years later and trying to apply maybe a rigid and unfair definition to something that doesn't have a strict answer necessarily? I feel like you could almost argue that there is no right or wrong answer as to what the first commemorative is in the U.S.
Well, I think there's a lot of kind of weight behind the idea that it would be the intention of the U.S. Post Office when issuing the stamps. I mean, after the Columbians, historically, don't all commemoratives have text on them saying they're commemorating an event? The Columbian Expo has the text saying this is what this is what this is. Everything after that has had a label on the stamp saying it's commemorating this event, or at least what the event is, if not using the word commemorative. And then they've got the 2 different albums. When you're talking about U.S. collections, you can have a definitive album.
It's used to split it up in particular. Yeah. I think the other thing that's important and relevant to this debate, though, is the intended purpose of the stamp. Right. So the Columbians notoriously cost $16.34 to buy a complete set. $16 in 1993 was not a little bit of money. And this 1866 Lincoln stamp, 15-cent stamp, was issued to pay a very specific postage rate to Europe. Right. This was a useful stamp, because prior to this point, you needed a 12-cent and a 3-cent or 3 5-cents or something like that. Here, all of a sudden, they're fulfilling a specific rate. So right. I think even if, look, it would be, it's impossible to argue one way or the other what the intentions of post office officials were 150 years ago. They were obviously aware that it was the anniversary of Lincoln's death. Maybe
that's why it's black. It's morning color.
It could. So
morning color.
When Warren G. Harding died in 1923, they issued the black Harding.
Black. Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's
that may be something to it as well. But I think what puts it firmly, I don't want to say firmly, what suggests a definitive status for it is that this was a necessary stamp. They were going to be issuing a 15-cent stamp anyways, probably. And it just so happened that Lincoln had died a year earlier. Let's, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, honor Lincoln, but also give people a stamp that they need, versus a $3 Columbian that has essentially no legitimate purpose. that fair to say?
Yeah, I like how you navigated around the word.
There must have
were
been. There must have been.
International overweight.
Yeah, I was just saying some
Right, okay.
overweight stuff. I'm sure.
You
yeah.
could find a way, but they
Okay.
were not essential. If you'd only
No,
had a
for
$1
sure not.
stamp, it would have been just as practical to put 5 $1 stamps as
Yeah.
one $5 stamp.
Right.
When you think about what it costs to engrave, produce
Right.
these stamps. So I think this debate, again, about commemorative versus definitive, it through the early part of the 20th century, it seems pretty cut and dry. You have the Washington Franklins that are definitive, and you have the Norse American and the Huguenot Walloon and the Lexington and Concord that are obviously commemorative. I feel like for most of this country's philatelic history, there's been a very clear dividing line.
Right.
But in the 1860s through 1890s, they weren't really thinking of commemorative versus definitive. This is a concept that was invented by stamp collectors, not invented by the post office itself.
Right.
Until
kind of recently, the post office will now issue things to commemorate people and say they're doing so. I mean, there was the reissue of the Columbians that were commemorating the commemorative stamps.
Yes, and have you ever seen those glassine envelopes? Every face value collection we get in has them. It's a glassine envelope that they put complete sheets in, and printed on it, it says collect commemoratives. It's fun.
Yeah.
So there's an instance of the post office using the word themselves.
Right.
Before we segue into the other more interesting conversation, can I just say one last thing?
Please.
Everyone knows what's the name of.
I forgot the name, but this funny-looking purple one.
Correct. The National Recovery Administration.
The National.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Scott 732, 3-cent purple from 1933. There was a lot of debate when the stamp came out. Is this a definitive or a commemorative issue? Because there were directives from the post office that this stamp would be sold preferentially. If you went in and said 3-cent stamp and didn't specify what you wanted on it, they were supposed to give you the NRA stamp. That's suggestive of a definitive. It also wasn't commemorating a historical event. It was commemorating something that was contemporaneous. It was issued alongside the rollout of this government program. So there was a lot of debate at the time. Is it commemorative? Is it definitive? And then some people even said it's neither. It's a propaganda issue, which you really want to muddy the waters. You make a third category. Propaganda. But it shows that this is a debate that is not unique to today. It's not a debate that's unique to the 1860s. This is one of these things where whenever we try and impose an arbitrary structure upon stamps that were issued a very long time ago, there's inherently going to be some disagreement. And I think that these debates and discussions are a huge part of what make the hobby fun. And ultimately, it's up to each individual whether or not the Lincoln, the 1869s, I believe even the Garfield is another one that is considered to be an early commemorative, or the 1876 postal stationery issue, or the Columbians. You can really take your pick what you believe the first U.S. commemorative is. Conventionally, we've said it's the Columbians, but that doesn't mean that the case is closed. And I think this is something that it'll continue, as evidenced by the number of posts. A lot of times somebody asks a question and somebody answers the question, and that subject quickly falls off to the next page.
But this has been going in an ongoing discussion for the past 2 weeks or something there.
Exactly. Amongst a lot of people who don't even collect commemorative stamps, whose interests are in the imperfs and the stamp list. This doesn't even cross over, but it still strikes a nerve with them, and I think that's very interesting. So, speaking of the lack of necessity for dollar value Columbians and dollar value Trans-Mississippis and everything, brings us to the second point, which relates specifically back to exhibiting, which is there is mail that is considered to be philatelic mail.
Yeah.
So, Michael, if in 1894 I sent you a registered letter with a $5 Columbian on it, and the rate for a registered letter was much, much less than $5.
Right.
And I was just looking for an excuse to use a $5 Columbian on cover. This is philatelic mail. This is mail that was contrived, that was created by a collector for a collector, typically.
Yes.
In America, what I've noticed through this discussion is we don't have a great term for the alternative to that. We have a German with us right now. Toby, what is the German?
He flew him in for this call.
We flew him in
Yeah,
just to have him pronounce this word so that I didn't have to.
You did it so well.
Toby, go ahead.
So for the non-philatelic
Non-philatelic mail,
yeah,
yes.
it's Bedarfspost.
Bedarfspost.
Okay.
Well, how would you translate that?
Basically, it's mail that needed for, let's say, business purposes or also private purposes be sent without the intention of just getting a used stamp or a nice looking envelope.
So you could call it necessary mail.
It's necessary mail,
Necessary
basically,
mail.
yeah. But there's also there in Germany, there's a thin line of what is necessary and not. For instance, if an old-time stamp dealer would send off his price list to his clients, some people say, yes, obviously it was necessary because he needed to sell his stamps. And other people even consider this is philatelically inspired because two medalists in the end sent back and forth that mail.
And they may have used stamps that were
not a standard stamp.
Right, they didn't have to use those stamps, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think this discussion is hinging upon a couple of things. The first of which is, I don't think people like defining something as a negative of something else. So you have philatelic mail. You don't want to call everything else non-philatelic mail.
No.
You want to have a word that is positive in connotation.
So can't they just use postal use?
I've heard commercial mail, but that typically limits it to business correspondence. You wouldn't call it personal letter.
But which is
necessarily,
at least for the old classic German parts, that's a large portion of what has survived.
Is the business correspondence.
The business correspondence.
Yes.
Okay. Ordinary mail is something that's been thrown out.
But but that can be confused with registered, at least from a non-native speaker.
Or ordinary could also mean like first class.
Yeah.
No special services.
Right.
I think that necessary is a good word.
But this deems the other to be unnecessary. It's not nice.
True. That's true. There's really nothing you can call either category without insulting the other category.
Yeah.
And you know, there are if a stamp dealer knows what he's doing, like you said, it may fulfill a legitimate rate, but they just, for example, number 505 is an error. It was a sheet of 2-cent stamps, and they accidentally put a couple of 5-cent stamps in the sheet of 2-cent stamps. If a stamp dealer, most people would use that stamp without looking at it closely.
Sure.
They figured it was a
You
2-cent
assume
stamp.
it's a 2 cents.
Exactly. If a stamp dealer knew what they were doing with that 5-cent stamp and paid a 5-cent rate with it, is that Bedarf?
At least the way I would see it, yes. But like I said, there are people that would consider it not to be Bedarf because it's sent by a dealer.
And there's certain things like that you can, there's certain rare coils, or there's certain rare types of, I'm thinking of like the early 20th century US. There's a type 1 and a type 1A or whatever. There are certain items that you can only get on cover if somebody knew what they were doing.
Same in Germany. I mean, there are so many services you could use and combine to get a certain amount of postage together. And obviously, some of them were only in place for a week, a few days even.
And people would run out
and people
mail stuff.
Just wouldn't care. But the people, the philatelic people, they knew what's the correct postage. So they made up these covers in the end. But still, they are mailed through the system. They have been received by...
They were handled by the post
office. Yeah, they were handled by the post. So from my view, it's Bedarf.
And do you think that judges should consider the intention of a cover when judging an exhibit?
Tough question. Because this relies so much on personal view, difficult.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
If but let's just say a $5 Colombian.
Yeah, I mean there are covers that are obvious, philatelically inspired,
and there's even well-known. Is it Wilson who sent all the British covers?
Yeah, there are a lot of people like this.
Where there's a well-known correspondence, you can see the sender and you go, "Oh, that's a so-and-so cover."
Yeah. And for instance, with the German plebiscite, there would be like many cities. We wouldn't have a city mark off if not for those people. went to every town.
Can you explain to people what a plebiscite is really quick, in case they don't know?
Okay, after sure they know. So
I'm sure a lot do, but
yeah. So basically, after World War One, the parts that used to be German, and they had people vote to which country they want to belong after that. So it was Germany, and people could decide we want to go to Poland and we want to go to Germany, and these are the plebiscites basically.
And in these plebiscites, there were probably a few main post offices.
Yes,
where
and
most
all the
of
rest
mail
was
handled.
very, very small towns with maybe like 50 to 100 inhabitants.
And these postmarks would be lost to history
Yes.
had stamp collectors and dealers not gone to them and sent mail through their system.
Yes.
So in that case, the only way to represent a small town in your collection
is with a cover of one of those people,
which is something contrived.
Yeah.
So it's almost not something that we should look down our nose at, because they were...
No, definitely not. For many things, like I said, nothing would have survived
without
those people acting there.
Years later.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a point. That's interesting. There's an entire area of philately that can only be collected because other philatelists existed and thought it would be important. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to... There'd be no history of that postmark.
And
of
these
that area.
people, most of the times, they made up covers which are correctly franked and everything is fine. They have all the cancels, whatever is needed to be considered a Bedarfsbrief. And just because it's from that correspondence, people say, no, it's made up.
Because they knew what they were doing. So people almost had to be ignorant of what kind of mail they were producing in order for it to be considered legitimate.
Yeah, basically.
Do you think many people in the German market hold that viewpoint, that it's lesser because it was created by a stamp dealer? Or do most people...
No. Most people do understand, for instance, if they collect plebiscite, they know if they want the commercial mail or the Bedarfspost, they will most likely only have covers from the bigger cities, and the rest they will just have to skip. But most of the people do appreciate that people did this 100 years ago and collect this as well.
It's almost like Zeppelin mail as well.
Yeah.
Where there was mail legitimately carried on Zeppelins, because that was the very little of it.
No, all was carried legitimately on there. It was just not fulfilling an actual purpose.
Yes, exactly. But there was some mail carried on Zeppelins. They didn't care that it was going on a Zeppelin. They cared that it was getting to point B.
That the Zeppelin is actually interesting when you look at like, for instance, Zeppelin with 3 francs. Like 15, 20 years ago, no one cared about it. They thought, what the heck?
Because there were no stamps.
There were no stamps. There was no nothing. But now there are enough people that really appreciate that this is like really a commercial usage, and they're welcome. Yeah.
Right. So the Zeppelin stamps kind of now that are flown without any stamps at all are, you're saying, appreciating more value than the ones with stamps? Or is it just a new kind of market that's popping up that people are gaining recognition of?
I wouldn't say new, but more and more people realize that or like that aspect that it's commercially done, this mail. Yeah.
It looks like at the time we're recording this Friday morning, it looks like some of these conversations have simmered down, which, even though these have sort of latched on and been spoken about for a couple of days, nothing on the Fragilla board lasts more than a couple of days usually. And it's always fun that there's something new and exciting. But I think these conversations, even if they fall to the 3rd or 4th page on the board, these are things that will continue to come up time and time again. And I think these are probably things that have been discussed, going back to the early days of the hobby. So, I think it's fun to have these. There's a lot in this hobby that has been settled that is old news, and things are a certain way. And I love that there's still aspects that are up in the air that we can, you sit back and watch people. It's like watching a presidential debate or something. We can watch people voice their opinion and then pick which side we like. So I think that's, again, this hobby's been going on for 160 years, thereabouts, and we're still fighting about things from the 1860s. That's a lot of fun.
No, but I mean, it's important because, at the end of the day, it's not going to change how people collect or even kind of the prices of the material. If you label this item as a commemorative now, I don't think the value of the 15-cent Lincoln is going to change whether or not Minkus makes it and throws it in the commemorative side. But
yes, one more point to make later.
Yeah, please.
There's also there are obviously German stamp discussion boards. And there's currently one topic where people decide a loose stamp with a certain cancellation, can it be expertized as genuine when no Bedarfspost post is known from this town or this specific cancellation? And yeah, there's a wide spread idea of what's the truth.
And this is something American collectors might not realize that I think is just an interesting related point. But in Europe, and I would say Germany in particular, cancellations are very important sometimes.
Yeah, obviously, if you have the inflation stamps, you have stamps that are worth nothing without a cancellation, and hundreds of thousands.
But the specific cancel, so with German colonies and with these plebiscites, people collect by cancel, post office.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, people typically collect postal history like that in the States, but I don't think there's many, if any, people who are trying to get an 1869 stamp with every. Typically, we didn't cancel the stamp with the town name.
No, you have these
with killers.
Attractive killers.
Yes. But in Germany, it was the actual town name.
It was the town name.
Canceled the stamp. So you can have a German East Africa stamp.
Yeah, that's actually what a lot of people collect.
And they collect each
from A to Z, all the cancellations that are there. And most people, it's tough to afford a collection with covers. So, yeah.
So in your opinion, if you have a used stamp with a cancellation unknown on a legitimate cover, can that be expertized? Since you are an expert yourself.
In general, yes, but there are, again, many soft points to it. Like, is this known on other covers? Even if they're philatelically inspired, does this only come on very expensive stamps and so on? Yeah, so it's,
So do you see this affecting certificates down the road? This conversation, or is it just kind of a lighthearted conversation, or is this a serious change how certificates are issued?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
There are too many towns, or actually I discussed this with another German expert from some German colonies. There are no covers known, but still there are loose stamps and pieces with that cancellation. And obviously it's possible to expertise whether this strike comes from the genuine device or not. Just because no letters have survived, it's, no reason to completely object to the cancel.
To wrap up this discussion, I think we should go around. So
sure.
You just learned about this discussion a couple minutes ago, so you have an unfair disadvantage here. Michael, what's the first United States commemorative?
The Colombians. I'd feel really it's.
I would stick to the Jefferson stamp. Was it Jefferson? No.
No, the
Lincoln.
Lincoln.
The 15-cent Lincoln.
Lincoln qualifies as a commemorative.
Thinking of it now, yeah, I would think so.
I'm going to split the difference and say the stamped envelopes from 1876.
Okay, then we'll wrap this up now.
No, Michael, Toby, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think following along on these debates is a lot of fun, and I urge everybody, no matter where you are, the Fredrola board typically skews more advanced, but there are a lot of things you can learn as a new collector, as a beginning collector, even as an intermediate collector, from reading this message board. So we'll put a link in the comments, in the description, but I really do think that everyone should check out the Fredrola board. I check it probably about 10 times a day.
You are supposed to work, John.
I keep the tab open in the background. Keep the tab open and I click refresh every once in a while. And there's certain days where nothing gets posted, and those are very long days. But even if you're not as obsessive as myself, I think everyone should check out this website.
Yeah. No, it's been a fantastic resource, and I've learned a lot from it, definitely.
Excellent.
Toby, thank you. Thank you for flying in for this call.
Exactly. Now we know how to pronounce Bedarfspost. You can go home now.
I will in a few hours.
Have a safe flight back.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is available on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. Our website is philatelypodcast.com. Email is philatelypodcast@gmail.com. We're on Twitter. And but if you've made it this far into an episode, a year and a half into the show, you probably know that we're on Twitter. So
yeah.
So that's all I've got. Michael,
thank
Tobi,
you.
Thank you,
Toby. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Talk to you soon, Michael.
Bye.
Bye.